Well, good morning to you, church family, and a very happy new year to all of you. This is being recorded for Sunday, December 27th, 2020. Let me say that one again 2020. What a year. It has been bizarre, it has been unique and unusual and incredibly challenging, and it's almost over. So hang in there a few more days until it gets done. But I think we all realize that 2021, at least in the beginning, is not going to be a lot different. It's not going to feel different or be much different than what 2020 has been. So I think our attitude is absolutely crucial as we enter a new year. And I think wisdom is absolutely vital in our attitude for 2021. So I want to share with you this morning some lessons from the wise men. They were not actually at the birth of Jesus. They got there later. So talking about them makes a nice transition on this last Sunday of the year. So I want to look at some lessons from what they did and what's recorded about them in Scripture. But let me talk a little bit about wisdom, first of all. Okay, it's a pretty large theme within Scripture. I think the way the whole COVID-19 pandemic has been handled pretty well illustrates the world's wisdom. Basically, nobody knows anything. They've just been flying by the seat of their pants, and we keep hearing political leaders say we have to follow the science and all that sort of stuff. But I think the reality is they don't know a whole lot. They're learning as they go. And there hasn't been a great deal of wisdom. There certainly is not much certainty in anything that goes on. It has all been highly politicized. What we do know is that thousands have died. Those in the know have flip-flopped back and forth a number of times about procedures and what's best and all of that. And it seems like the best they've come up with is wear a mask, isolate yourself, social distance from people, wash your hands a lot. And now putting a whole lot of eggs in one basket in terms of the vaccines that have been developed. So I'm not sure whether you will want to take the vaccine or not. That's obviously a big question. Do we take it? Do we not? What's wisdom in that decision? Well, I think 1 Corinthians 3 and verses 19 and 20 pretty well say what's been going on in terms of the world's wisdom in dealing with this current crisis. Those two verses say, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness, and again, the Lord knows that the thoughts of the wise are futile." So how relevant is that? The world's wisdom is foolishness to God. And I think there's been a lot of that kind of foolishness demonstrated all too well. Let me share with you some scriptures that talk about wisdom, because as I said, it's a major theme within Scripture. In 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 32, it says, it refers to the men of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. We need some men of Issachar now who understand the craziness going on and know what we really ought to do. Well, Proverbs has a lot to say about wisdom. So in Proverbs 3 and verses 13 and 14, it says, "Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold." And in chapter 4 and verses 5 through 7, it says, "Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding." And in verse 23 of Proverbs 4, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life." And then in chapter 8 and verse 11 in Proverbs, it says, "For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her." Well, then in James chapter 1 and verse 5, James writes, and he says this, he said, "If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So if you're lacking wisdom, ask. And then in James chapter 3 and verses 13 through 17, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Well, that's quite a list talking about God's wisdom, and it is so different than the wisdom of the world. Well, turn with me to Matthew chapter 2. After sharing those different verses on wisdom, let's look at the story of the wise men. Many believe they are very familiar with it, and many of you are, although some think that the wise men appeared at Jesus' birth, and they certainly did not. Look at Matthew chapter 2. We'll start just by reading verse 1. It said, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So there are all kinds of questions about these wise men. And we're going to sound a lot like the world here because we ask, what did we know for sure? And the answer is nothing. We don't know for sure how many wise men there were. We don't know exactly where they came from. We don't know their names. We don't know exactly who they were. We don't know exactly how the star that they followed worked. We really don't know anything about any of that. But we do know what they did, and it's very valuable. There's some very valuable lessons in that for us. So as we think of wisdom for 2021, here's some great examples to follow. The first thing that we see the wise men doing is they were seeking the Christ. They were seeking out the Messiah. Look at verse 2. It says, and asked, where's the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. So the wise men are looking for the King of the Jews simply in order to worship, simply in order to add honor and value and all to him. That was an incredibly wise thing for them to be doing, and for us as well. People today are seeking meaning and purpose in their life. They're seeking acceptance and significance and purpose and fulfillment in life. They're seeking that in all kinds of ways. In the men's group, we saw a video. Pat Morley said, the world wants to tell us that Jesus can't meet our needs, but the truth, the reality is the only way that the needs of our heart really can be met is through Jesus Christ. So we need to be seeking him. The world seeks significance and purpose in all the wrong ways. Through working through too much, through illicit relationships, through drugs, through sports, through eating, all of those kinds of things. And those all end up being empty. And then they say Christ can't meet your needs either, but the reality is only Christ can. In Matthew 6 and verse 33, Jesus said, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So to be truly wise, when we're seeking Christ, when we're putting him first in our life, putting him where he really ought to be, the rest of it will fall in place. Will it be perfect? No, it will in the kingdom, not right now. But we need to keep all those things in their proper place, and then things tend to go far more smoothly. In Psalm 9 and verse 10, it says, those who know your name will trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. God's not going to forsake you when you're seeking after him, when you're trying to find him in a close relationship with him. He's going to be there for you. In Isaiah 55 and verse 6, it says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. So if you're feeling like God's a long way off, it's not because God moved. It's usually just because in our lives we tend to drift away from him. He's near. Seek him. He'll make himself known to you. And in Jeremiah 29:13, It says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Well, people tend to seek God on their own terms, for their own personal benefit. They just want to put God in a box and bring him out when it's handy for them, when they want him just to meet all of their needs. What they really want is the guy in the red suit, just to give them everything they want. But that's fantasy. That's not reality. That's not how it really works at all. The wise man teaches that seeking Christ is a great thing to do. It's wise to do that. In our crazy mixed up world, it's wise for us to do that now as well. The second thing I see that the wise men really were doing and that they teach us is they remained highly focused. Look at Matthew 2 and verse 3. It says, when King Herod heard this, that they were looking for the one born king of the Jews, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. King Herod was psychotic, so when he was all worked up, it wasn't good to be around him at all. Verse 8, it says, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him. And they saw right through that. God had told him he doesn't want to worship he doesn't want to worship the Messiah. He wants to eliminate him. So in verse 12, it says, having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So they dealt with all the distractions that they faced along the way. You know, they come to Jerusalem. They don't know where the Messiah was to be born. They encounter a crazy king who's an absolute whack job off his rocker. All kinds of different distractions that were going on, and yet they stayed very focused, wanting to find the Christ so they could worship him. Well, during Advent season, during Christmas season, typically there are all kinds of distractions because there are all kinds of things that are going on. I think people tend to lose sight of the baby, lose sight of Jesus, and remembering that it's really about him. We tend to lose that message about him. We lose sight of the kingdom and that perspective. There's just all kinds of things going on. This year, maybe not quite so much, because so many things are shut down. The pace is probably a little slower and there aren't quite so many distractions, but the fact that there aren't all those distractions is distracting because life's not normal this year in 2020. So there's all of those kinds of things going on. Yet the wise men stayed highly focused on what they were doing. Their purpose was to come to find the Messiah and to worship him, and they did that. We need to be highly focused as well. We need to be keeping our eyes on Christ. And in verse 11, it says that they did what they came to do. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. So they worshipped the Christ. They worshipped the Messiah. It's been estimated that it took them anywhere from 6 to 20 months traveling to find the Christ and to be able to spend that time with him. It's hard to wrap our head around that. When we can get on an airplane and go across the country in a matter of a few hours, to picture them traveling for months and months and months, day in and day out, every day, on this journey to go and to find the Messiah just so they could worship. They simply wanted to see the Christ and bow down and encounter him, knowing that would be for them absolutely life-changing. I can't help but think of the story of Simeon in Luke 2. He spent his time at the temple, and Joseph and Mary bring the 8-day-old Jesus to him. God tells him that's the Messiah, and he essentially says, okay, I can die in peace, Lord, because I've seen your salvation. He just was incredibly focused on that and wanted to worship the Messiah in that way. So the wise men have this months-long journey for those moments of worship. They bring those expensive gifts. They offer them to probably the toddler at that point. They bow down and worship. Were they there an hour? Were they there 2 hours, 3 hours? After months of travel, I'm sure that they weren't there very long at all. And then in verse 12, it says that they were warned in a dream about to go home a different way. Bethlehem's only 5 miles from Jerusalem, so they weren't very far from a crazy king, but they go home a different way. Matthew, as writer, his audience was primarily a Jewish audience. There was a tradition in Jerusalem that you would enter Jerusalem through one gate and then leave through another. And symbolically, what that was saying was that you had come, you had worshiped, and you were changed. It had made a dramatic difference in your life. So I don't think that tradition was lost on Matthew or on his readers when he said that the wise men came one way and they went home another way. I think they would have been thinking about that, how they're changed because they had encountered the Christ and had been changed from the inside out. And I think that happens for us as well. That's wisdom, to worship the Messiah and to be changed. So how do we apply these things? What can we do then as we look toward beginning a new year, as we welcome the end of a crazy year that's been difficult and challenging in so many ways, knowing the new year is not going to be a lot different than that, at least to start. So what's our attitude to be? What are some wise things that we can do as we begin a new year and as we go forward trusting in the Lord? Well, I think some of these are quite obvious. First of all, we need to seek Christ daily. We just need to have a heart that's really receptive to Him as we keep seeking Him. Again, if God feels like He's a long way off, it's not because He moved. It's because we've been doing things that enable us to drift away from the Lord. So we need a heart receptive to Christ. We need to listen to His voice. We need to listen to the promptings of the Lord and to His leading. I think we need to be in the Word daily, in the Bible daily, listening to God from that. We need to be in prayer, connecting with God in that way. You know, just listening to God in every way we can, through the right kind of music, through the right kind of people. You know, I've come to the place where I'm just not listening to the news very much at all. I think it's more important at this point, as we begin a new year, to be listening to what the Lord has to say instead of just the daily death counts on the news. It's just depressing. There's so many new cases, so many new deaths, and it just brings you down in so many ways. I'm not discounting all of that. I'm simply saying I think it's far more wise to be receptive to the Lord and to seek Christ and to listen to what He has to say to us. So I highly encourage you to do that in every way you can. Keep seeking the Lord. Keep listening to Him. Secondly, I really think it's wise that we stay focused like the wise men were. You know, typically in our lives, we would say, well, we're busy, all these things going on, especially during the Advent season, and we just need to slow down. This year may be a dramatic exception to that because there are so many fewer options. Maybe the pace has been a little bit slower than normal, but maybe not slow enough. I just think of the story in Luke when right after Jesus is born, it says Mary pondered all these things in her heart after the shepherds had visited and everything had gone on. Mary just kind of paused, pondered all these things in her heart. Do you ever do that? Do you ever just stop and really think about God's grace to you and all that He's done on your behalf? The Apostle Paul said it this way in Colossians 3 and verse 2. He said, set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. Just stop sometimes, stay focused and ponder, think about what God has done for you. Yeah, it's been a crazy year in 2020, but how have you been blessed? What has God done on your behalf? I think we need to stay focused on the fact that relationships really matter most. One of the terrible things about this pandemic is the isolation that it's caused. We're not around each other. I so miss seeing all of you guys and being around you. Time with people is what really matters, not all this stuff in our lives. It's just so important. that we focus on those relationships. Maybe we can't be together as much, or we choose not to be together as much, but we can still contact each other. We don't have to be completely isolated. There are phones, there's computers, there's ways to certainly to remain in contact. And that's the major purpose of sending these messages out to you, is to help you stay connected in that way. So we need to stay focused on our relationships, our family, and how that really matters. I also think we really need to stay focused on serving. When times get tough, we tend to turn inward. We tend to get very selfish. I'm not accusing anybody of that, but it tends to happen when times are really tough and we begin to look inward. We tend to get kind of selfish. We tend to get kind of down. And one of the ways to deal with that is to focus on others and to be involved in servicing others, so that the focus is not on ourselves. So don't let the isolation be an excuse for you not to serve. I think there are many things that you can do. I visited with a number of people in the past in a nursing home who were feeling like they weren't worth much, like they couldn't do anything. And I just encouraged them. I usually would ask, well, do you pray? And they'd say, yeah. And I said, then you can be a great prayer warrior. That's still serving. That's still doing something incredibly valuable and important. So stay focused not on self, but stay focused on serving others as well. So seek Christ daily. Stay focused on Christ during this time. And then thirdly, let me encourage you just to worship well and to worship often, because there is great wisdom in that. The word worship simply means to attribute worth, to attribute honor, to attribute value to someone. Those wise men traveled every day for months to have those few moments of bowing down and attributing honor to that very young child. I think our corporate times of worship are extremely important, but I think the personal times of worship are incredibly important too. When we simply acknowledge our God, when we walk out in the evening and say, what an incredible sunset. I know the Creator who did that. I can't express enough appreciation and thanks to Dennis Cheatwood for the phenomenal job that he's done, sending out to you those worship opportunities on Sunday morning as well as on Wednesdays. Dennis has done a fantastic job of that, trying to help all of us to stay connected. So I highly encourage you to take those few moments it takes to listen to that music, to read through Dennis's thoughts, and to connect with God in that way. He's done a phenomenal job of doing that. I think we need to worship so much, have our hearts so filled with God that there's no room for fear. Because this whole year has been about fear, the pandemic, such fear. And it's legitimate. COVID's a real thing. But let's worship so much that our hearts are full of praise, of acknowledgement, of and honor to God. So much so that there's hardly any room at all for any fear to be in our hearts. And I would encourage you, as you worship, to just share your heart with other people, to share your relationship with God with others. Not a canned speech, but just to share with them what He means to you. I think that's a wonderfully wise thing to do. Let me kind of wrap things up with this quote. It happens to be from Charles Swindoll. I think this is a great quote. He says, "What comes from the Lord because it's impossible for humans to manufacture it?" The answer is wisdom. He says, "What comes from humans because it is impossible for the Lord to experience it?" The answer is worry. And then he says, what is it that brings wisdom and dispels worry? It's worship. It's connecting with God. It's acknowledging Him. So again, what comes from the Lord because it's impossible for humans to manufacture it? Wisdom. What comes from humans because it's impossible for the Lord to experience it? Worry. What is it that brings wisdom and dispels worry? It's worship. So in these last days of 2020, I just want to highly encourage all of you to fill your hearts with worship It's wise to seek the Lord. It's wise to stay focused on Him. It's incredibly wise to worship Him and to fill your heart with that. So I wish you all God's best in 2021. Bye for now.